everyone, and welcome to Moonbeam Musings. Today I'm joined by Juliet Hollingsworth, hypnotherapist, author, and researcher into ancient wisdom and modern wellness. Juliet recently returned from a powerful journey across Africa where she spent time with tribal communities, reconnecting with the rhythms of nature and exploring human potential through ancestral living. In today's episode, we'll dive into her transformative experience and what we can learn from indigenous knowledge systems and how her travels have shaped her upcoming book, The Human Mismatch Theory. A compelling look at how modern life conflicts with the environments we're biologically designed for. From rituals to purpose, stress to rhythm, we're talking about the roots of healing and reconnection. Welcome, Juliet.
Hello, thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. So, what inspired you to take up the recent trip to Africa?
Well, despite your very full introduction, it was simply our 10-year-old daughter who asked to go on a safari holiday to Africa. And I think it's something that I've always wanted to do. I remembered actually how a family member, when I was very young, a pre-teenage, I think, went to Africa, maybe Kenya, on a safari holiday, and I was always inspired. And so that was really the starting of it. And then I was so pleased, I think pleased is probably too light a word, but so pleased to find out that a tribe I'd been researching lived exactly where we were going. So that was really exciting, although I can't say it was the inspiration for going, but it was certainly became part of the trip when I found that out.
Well, rather than focusing specifically on the tribe, what was your experience about the overall culture there? How it felt to live outside of what we're used to over here. And we're based, for everyone, we're based in the UK in the southeast. So you're sort of south of London, I'm east of London in the boroughs around there.
Mm. It is, it's so different. Um, I don't want to, um, there's people who go and who are from Africa, and there's people who go and work out there for short periods of time, but much longer than I was out there for. And there's people, I know someone, for instance, who lived for many, many years in Africa. I can't remember exactly which country, I believe Uganda, but we were in Tanzania and we were there for a very short amount of time. And so I don't want to, um, misinform or say things that are untrue or even act like I'm an expert on Africa. But my experience is that it just is so different in so many ways, yet similar in other ways. Um, the first thing I noticed was how joyful and friendly the people that we came across were everywhere we went, from being met at the airport to um, staff in the restaurant, in the hotels, um, just people falling over themselves to help us really, but not just that, also be friendly. Everywhere we went, everyone says hello in their language, and big smiles, and everyone seemed very happy. I had a few conversations with different people, and some expressed happiness um, in general, and some expressed hope for a better future. But I, again, I don't want to misrepresent these people who might be putting on a brave face to please the tourists that are spending their money there. Um, but but really, I got a sense that the people were far happier than the people here. Even if they didn't necessarily realize it, which is a strange a strange kind of thing. And one thing that I noticed, I was reading a book when I was there called Breath by James Nestor, which is a fantastic book. And I'd noticed before I started the book how that these, I called it the African smile. Like everywhere you looked, everyone you looked at just had this beautiful smile on their face. And until I started the book, I was just thinking it was just lovely to see people so happy and smiling all of the time. And I kept saying to people, "You're all so happy." Um, And then I read in the book about how we here, well, actually, it just said humans. It didn't say, it said modern humans. It didn't say people in the Western developed countries. But it talked about how we now we didn't, as hunter gatherers, we didn't cook our food in the way we do now, and we certainly didn't have processed food in the way we do now. And so the book was talking about how where we don't chew our food enough, our jaws get misshapen, and our misshapen jaws cause us to not breathe properly. But what was interesting is part of that is that because of the misshapen jaws, we get wonky teeth. And as soon as I read that in the book, I noticed that every single person in that I came across, African person, Tanzanian person, had perfectly straight teeth. And I can assure you that these people were not going to the orthodontist because they were quite poor. I don't think there was I even saw a dentist, let alone an orthodontist. And I thought it's because their diet is more natural than ours, even though they are eating a lot of soft foods like rice and maize. They are still eating also more natural things, and there's more chewing, and it was just fascinating to see that. I noticed how much they walk everywhere, just walking and walking and walking, and it was so interesting to see the many of the males actually um, walking down the streets. Everyone had a stick in their hand, and I think part of that is to do with culture, but also a large part of that is to do with protection from the animals. And so, yeah, lots of walking, and that lots of people are very much living in well, all kind of handmade. I say man-made. Our buildings are man-made, but man-made by the owner of the property, houses. But so many of these simple mud huts everywhere. Um, yeah, and the carrying on the head, the way the women carry things on their head, and I also noticed you'd see the women as you drove down the road, you'd see the women washing their clothes in the buckets and how they bend. And it's an interesting thing because I know that lots of us bend to pick things up wrong. And my dad's always pulling me up on it and always has, bend from your knees, bend from your knees. But what I noticed is these women are bending from their hips. They're almost doing a downward dog position. And it made me think, that's the way we should bend. And that's probably why downward dog is such a important pose in yoga. And so I found that quite interesting. And also the thing that was starkingly obvious to me is how separate the males and females are. So when we were out and about, and I don't think it's a religious thing, I think it's just a more natural way of being. I can't recall seeing one family unit, as in a mum and a dad and children. I saw women with children and men in groups, groups of men, groups of women all sat around, but never a mixture of the two. And so I found that quite fascinating. And when I spent some time with the Hadzabe tribe, I was told there that the males and females don't really come together in the daytime. They're not. I don't think their rules are strict or authoritarian or anything like that. It's just the way it is. And so the women were in one area and the men in a separate area, and they maybe come together at night, potentially back in their family groups. However, we then went on to the Datoga tribe, and I was speaking to them about the way they live. And again, it was the same. The women were in one space and the men were in the other, doing their jobs that they do. And at night, the whole family sleeps together, but the men sleep in one space and the women sleep in another space. So I'm not sure about the Hadzabe, whether they also sleep separately like that, but they don't tend to come together during the day. I think, as I said, it's not a strict rule. They did a dance and included us in a dance, and they all came together then. But in terms of hanging out, if you like. It's very separate, and I noticed that across the whole of Tanzania.
It's really interesting. I know some people in retirement here in the UK, they find it very difficult because they're together all the time.
Mm.
Naturally, in communities, women have often been together and men been together, and a woman and man separated from a community or tribe don't often hang out for long periods of time. So it's quite interesting when we try and do that. And obviously it works for some people, but some couples even here, one of them ends up going back to work, or they have
Mm.
very separate lives. Another thing I wanted to mention when you spoke about them smiling, and it's good to acknowledge that it doesn't sound like it's a front, because last year I was in Cuba and it definitely was a bit of a front there. There was definitely an element. I mean, the government dictates that foreigners and visitors see the country in a positive light.
Right.
And I definitely heard, I actually, one woman actually spoke up and she was talking in a negative way about the country. And I overheard her and she could see that because I speak Spanish. And she said to me, "Oh, just close your ears, because they're not allowed to do that in front of foreigners." Um,
Mm.
So it's interesting, but it does sound quite genuine from your experience. It felt quite genuine, and especially if you were out and about and you were seeing people in their daily lives rather than just in a hotel in sort of a specific environment. If you were outside the house and you were seeing people on the street, etc. Um,
Yeah. I mean, maybe it wasn't so much. I didn't see the smiling so much then, but I think a part of it is, to some extent, what you say. They rely so heavily on tourism that they want their tourists to have a good experience. But when we drove down the road, all of the children and some of the adults as well would wave as we drove down the road. And I never quite got to the bottom of why the children wave. And that seems like such a strange question to ask. Why are the children waving at us? Because why shouldn't the children wave? It's lovely that the children wave at people driving past. I mean, that's beautiful. Maybe a bigger question is, why don't the children here wave? But I do know that my kids quite like winding the window down and shouting at people, shouting hello and waving at people out the window. It's a fun thing to do, and they do it almost as a game. Uh, and it feels a bit uncomfortable because that's not what we do here. And sometimes I want to say to them, don't do that. But when you drive through Tanzania, all the children are waving as you drive past. But again, I never asked the question. I don't know if they're waving. We did stop at one place at one point, and some children kind of asked for some money, and so I don't. It didn't feel like it, but I'm not 100% sure that it wasn't them trying to wave in the hope we might stop and give them something. But it did just genuinely feel like they waved to be friendly.
mm. Yeah. I mean, was there a moment that made you pause and think, or any moment of inspiration, or that you felt was fundamental when you were out there, or epiphanies or anything?
Um, no, I think it certainly confirmed how I feel um, about modern life, and how we here in certainly in our country, and probably most Western societies, um, are living in such huge misalignment with our biology and how damaging it is for us. And they are there in Tanzania. Like you can't pretend they're not. That there are still people working, and it's long, long days. Um, but I think we are so much more into our technology here, and it's pulling us so far away from our biology that I think it's really damaging. And I that was really confirmed when we were there, definitely.
Mm. Yeah, I guess on that note, what insights did you gain about sort of the overstimulation and the disconnection in the West specifically?
Mm. I don't know about overstimulation um, necessarily, um, but we just we don't move. I mean, they're walking everywhere there. Cars are not the way they are here, and they walk miles. You know, some of the children are walking 5, 6 kilometers to go to school, um, and that's normal. And it can sound like a hardship from our perspective, um, but actually, it's probably really healthy. And you see these children kind of taking their time really as they walk, and they've got their sticks, and you just see groups of children stopped off playing about in the bushes, obviously on their way home. And the life is just more natural, it's more outside. They're not sat inside on a computer game or a screen. And exercise, that occasionally we see people running out for a run, but really you see them doing, living. They're living to survive, or yeah, living to survive. But I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean it in the things, for a lot of the people, the things they're doing are just so much closer to natural living that they don't need to go to the gym for an hour in the morning. And look, this isn't everyone. We were in a hotel, and there was, on one night, seven guests in the hotel, and I think 10 members of staff. So those 10 members of staff are not living a natural life. They're getting up early and they're going to work, and they're stood in a hotel waiting on guests for the whole day. That's not different to how we're living here. But there are a lot of people, just much more rooted in nature.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've got all these mod cons that look like they're helping us, like washing machines and things like that, and then
Yeah,
we have to, instead of spending our time doing that, we have to go to the gym because we're not
exactly,
using our body at all in different ways that we would do if we were doing these chores that they're doing, and
exactly.
there's yeah, there's a joy in those sorts of chores in a way.
Yeah, it gives purpose to life, which is what we all seek.
Yeah, and you can do that in a joint way. I watched it was from the 1940s in a wash house in East London. I watched a little video about that, and it was just lovely. The women used to go there, and that was using machines, but they'd go there, and it was a community thing, and they'd see their friends there, and they'd do their washing, and all of these things that help us, in inverted commas, sometimes are detaching us from our communities, isolating us in a way as well. Um, but I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about the human mismatch theory, and which is the main topic of your book.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's essentially, what you just said. So, I'm going to read you my core point, because it's, at least if I read you here, I get everything across. So humans evolved to cycle naturally between stress and recovery. In our ancestral environment, survival depended on moving, nourishing, sleeping, and connecting. From these survival needs, a deep purpose emerged. Purpose wasn't abstract, it came from meaningful roles within the tribe, from contributing to survival and belonging. We transitioned smoothly between the stress response, a short-term motivator, and homeostasis. Today, modern stressors keep the stress response switched on. Without the survival needs, we lack movement, nourishment, sleep, connection, and purpose, and this leads to chronic dysregulation of the mind and body. So, what we were just talking about, and um, we're still talking about people living as more modern humans than our biology expects us to live. So, humans have, as we know us today, pretty much, have been in existence, for about 300,000 years. And the agricultural revolution happened about 12,000 years ago, which means that for 97% of the time, humans, or 96 roughly percent of the time that humans have been in existence, so our brains have been as we know them today, we lived as hunter-gatherers. We didn't own animals or keep animals. We didn't own plots of land. We didn't own anything. Um, we would we didn't trade with each other. We would go out into the land and hunt for an animal to eat when we needed it, and we would go and pick roots and plants, and fruits to supplement. I was going to say supplement, but actually I think it was the other way around. The meat supplemented the plant-based foods, and we would follow the seasons. So as the rains came, the animals would move, and we would follow that so that we could continue to hunt the animals. And we lived like that for 96% of the time that we've been in existence. And then for approximately 4% of the time that we've been in existence, we have been getting increasingly more distant from that. So it started with the agricultural revolution, when someone decided it would be a good idea to try and manipulate the plants and grow our own so that we didn't have to keep chasing them. And the same with the animals, own our own animals and keep them, and then we didn't have to keep chasing the animals. But that obviously immediately started or was the beginning of this scarcity culture that we live in, because suddenly we were having to try and grow plants and crops in places where they weren't necessarily designed, that's the wrong word, wouldn't necessarily naturally grow. And we were trying to grow them in weather conditions that wasn't natural. So instead of the plants growing in alignment with the seasons and us moving with the seasons, we would try and grow something in all seasons. And then we started to worry about what if it didn't grow? What if next month nothing grows? What if the weather's wrong and it doesn't grow? And then we start chasing things, and then we started to think, well, I'm going to have to grow double the amount so that if I don't grow any next year, I've got enough in storage. And then the animals, and then we had to start protecting our space, because people would come and steal each other's spaces or each other's animals. And so that's when we started putting in boundaries from each other and separating ourselves from the rest of the community. And then, of course, the Industrial Revolution came, which made all of that little bit easier. We had machinery to do things. And then it's gone from there. And so our brains still expect us to function as we did prior to the agricultural revolution, following the seasons, living in a community as one, hunting, gathering, no boundaries, different foods depending on the season, regular movement when we go and hunt, but then regular downtime when we've finished foraging and hunting, and we come together as a community. Also, deep knowledge of the other people within our community, and sleeping in alignment with the rising of the sun and the falling of the sun, which obviously was different as soon as the agricultural revolution started, and they were having to get up at different times to tend to the crops, etc. And so we're moving even further away from it with computers and all the other technology that we have. And so even though we think that these things are benefiting us and bringing us closer together and helping us reconnect, they're not helping us in the way that our brain expects us to function. And so we have this idea in our head, this conscious idea that this is great, we're doing all the right things, but the brain is still almost exactly the same as it was 300,000 years ago, up until just 12,000 years ago, when we lived in a vastly different way. And it's hugely damaging for us, and it's probably why we're all so sick.
Wow. Yeah, thank you for that. It's very interesting.
Mm.
And I think it's very true. I absolutely loved what you said as well previously about the chewing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Because we didn't cook foods until the advent of fire.
mm. And when do you know when that was?
No, but I think that it was probably quite early on. I mean, I do, but I've forgotten. If we had to be able to live in cold, very, very cold climates. So I think it was quite early on, but still, it's very different cooking something on a fire and eating it that you've picked in the wild and cooked yourself to what it is going and buying a packeted food in the supermarket, in terms of how much you have to chew it. Meat, even wild caught meat, and the hunter gatherers, they eat all of the animal, not the bones, I'm sure, but the chewier parts as well, whereas we're so precious here, and we
Well,
don't
I
even want
mean,
to order or buy the fattier, gristlier parts of the meat, let alone eat them.
exactly. And when you eat an organic chicken, it is often slightly tougher than
Hmm.
another supermarket bought chicken. And so imagine back then it was even more. And maybe, I don't know, I haven't looked into this, but I imagine also that a lot of stuff was eaten raw. And even with the fires, primarily I imagine that was for meat anyway.
Yeah, when we were with the tribe, they were showing us. So there's a tree, that they have in Tanzania, called the baobab tree.
Hmm.
Baobab tree, I think that's the right name. And these trees live up to 3,000 years old, and they're huge, but they have a fruit on them. And so, um, the people there pick the fruit and eat the fruit as you would, but there's seeds inside the fruit, and they chew the seeds like chewing gum. They don't have a chewy texture like chewing gum. They have a seed-like texture. They're probably the size of, oh, I don't know, like a nut, um, a small nut, and they chew it, and it's got a flavour to it, which I can't remember. I think it might be like a lemony flavour, and then they spit it out when they're done. But even that kind of chewing.
Yeah, I mean, other cultures also have that. So the Greek culture has
Oh, of course.
mastica, which,
Yeah,
yeah, and it's much better than our unnatural chewing gum that we have today. I always try and grab some when I'm out
it's
there in
recommended in
Cyprus.
the
Yeah.
Breathe book. Yeah, I think you can buy
Yeah.
it here now. Breath, not breathe.
Oh, really? Yeah, it's really
Yeah,
because it's good because I think our chewing gum can cause stomach ulcers, whereas this actually heals stomach ulcers, so it's the complete opposite. But yeah, you've got to get used to these things. It is chewy. It's not chewing gum. It doesn't have the same flavour. Um, yeah, I always liked that though. So I guess different cultures they knew they needed to chew.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. It's fascinating.
Well, moving on a little bit, because I wanted to touch on a community that you run here
Mm.
called the Burrow. So I wonder if you could tell us a bit about that and what inspired you to set that up.
Yeah, so I I think what's happened is I've had like a washing machine of thoughts and ideas going around my head, and it's come together into one thing, which is the book that we just talked about. So prior to that, I I should explain, or you said about my work, but I've worked as a therapist for, um, what, 18 years or so. Um, and so I've had the privilege of hearing people's stories, and a lot of stories, and putting them all together, come to some conclusions really. And a couple of years ago, or not a couple of years, about a year and a half ago, um, I just really felt quite strongly that people needed to access, um, different types of a holistic, um, treatment plan. That's wrong. I was speaking to a lot of people who were coming to see me for therapy, and I knew that I could help them, but I knew I couldn't help them alone. They needed more. And I don't mean more as in, more experienced therapist, or more therapy, but they needed a more holistic approach. So it's all very well talking, but there's so many other healing modalities that need to come together to truly heal the mind and body. And I was saying to people, go and try this, go and try that, go and do this, go and do that. And I eventually, realized that it would be quite nice to be able to bring all those things together into one space. I had previous experience. You didn't mention, but my children had gone to a community-based school for 5 years, And so I'd had that experience of being in a community that did focus quite a lot on self-development and healing as well. And that unfortunately folded, so for reasons that were relevant to this podcast. And so I was missing that as well. And I managed to find some land and put together this concept, I guess, which we call the Burrow. And we put on various events throughout the year that come together to provide a space for people, which is community focused, and there's healing workshops, for example, gong meditations and 5 rhythms, dancing, and just coming together as a community. And we're really, although it's evolving and it will always be evolving, it's evolving into something that somehow gives us all a snippet into living a bit more naturally. Although we only have a couple of events a month, and people, when you're living naturally, it's all day, every day. It's nothing like that, but it's just a little bit of time away from the screens and coming together with other people, less individualism, and also some of those healing tools, like other people doing things for you, like the gong meditation, where that's a sit there and have someone help you type experience.
Yeah, and I'll say I've come along to one and it was really lovely. Everyone was very friendly. There was a family atmosphere. Everyone pitched in to support because it's mostly outside, although there's shelter, and there's fire, and it was just really really lovely to get together and be part of that. And people, will put some links in the bio. People are welcome to come along, but I know that you book out quite often. You sell out of your events. They're
Yeah,
getting more and more popular because there's a need for it.
that's exactly it. Every time anyone comes to anything, they express how much there is a need for it and how much they need it. One of the things that we do monthly is a fireside chat. And so we come together around the fire for 2 hours on a Friday evening, and there's a topic of conversation set before. Sometimes it's suggested by the community, sometimes I decide it, and it's generally some kind of philosophical topic of conversation. And we sit there and we bring food, just nibbles. We sit on hay bales around the fire and we just talk about that topic for 2 hours, and then we go home. And it's really, really lovely. It's just really uplifting and energizing and feels good.
Mm.
But interestingly, when we visited the tribe, the Hadzabe tribe, in Tanzania, as we approached their base camp, I don't know what you call it, as we approached, we walked up to a group of men sat around a fire chatting, and I just felt like we were at one of our fireside chats. That's what it felt like. They were sat on logs. Fair enough, they were all dressed in animal skins, which is not what we dress in when we're sat around our fire. But they were sat there talking as we are. I mean, the only difference was they were a group of men, and the women were somewhere else crafting, sat in their space crafting. It just felt very familiar, very normal.
It's interesting how we have to actively bring back these rituals into
Mm.
our lives that have been lost in order to be more, I'm going to use the word grounded. I think a lot of listeners will understand that. To be more grounded in our lives because there's so much screen time and so much detachment from nature and other people. And now we're having to actively look at implementing these rituals.
Yeah, and they're so important because without them, our body suffers.
Or a lot of illnesses, inflammation, etc., bored out of that. I feel like we're sort of a generation that are suffering a little bit because of the way that there's a bit more knowledge now about
Mm.
computers and things like that. But we've had, I don't want to show our age, but we've had probably 20 years of computers and sitting at desks and things which have had an impact. I know for sure my job has always been that. I think as a therapist, you've managed to probably escape that for a little bit of time, but you still have to use a computer every day.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, well, if someone's feeling disconnected on that note or overwhelmed, where would you suggest that they would begin?
So disconnection is a massive part of. I have kind of 5 things that I think are paramount, and they are nourishment, sleep, movement, purpose, and connection. Without those 5 things, I think that we suffer. Um, and so I think it's important from my perspective, they come together. I don't think one thing can can heal, but in terms of connection, that's can I explain why I think why it's so important to
Yeah, of
us?
course you can.
So when we lived as hunter gatherers, it was really important to live um, with other people in a community because we're unsafe when we're not. So there are animals. If we go back to the Hatabi tribe, when they go out hunting, there are animals that can hurt them. And not only when they go out hunting, they still live in the wilds. So there are still um, dangerous animals like lions and dangerous animals like elephants who can trample over them right on their doorstep. And when they go out hunting to try and get their food, um, they there is the possibility that they will come across any of these animals, and that's exactly how it would have been for all humans for 97%, 96, 97% of our history. And so we needed to live as a community, as a group, as one. And therefore, the brain is designed in such a way that when we are not connecting with other people in this way, it will try to motivate us to connect with other people in this way. And so we have what I call the motivator hormones and the gratifying hormones. And so the motivator hormones are the ones like cortisol and adrenaline that will try and encourage us to move, to do something, to act. And then there's the gratifier hormones like oxytocin, um, that will and dopamine that will give us just a short burst of feel good when we've done something that's put us back onto the right path. And so I have a kind of analogy that the road of survival is this straight road, completely straight from one point to another point. And then as human beings, we should um, kind of snake around this road. And every time we kind of come off it, my hands hit, every time we kind of come off it, a motivating hormone kicks in, like adrenaline, which nudges us to act and do something and puts us back onto the road. And then as we get onto the road, we get the gratifying hormone, which rewards us for a short period of time. And then we might come off it slightly, and the motivator hormone will kick in and it will nudge us back on. And we kind of go like this for life. That's how we should go. And that's exactly how our body's supposed to work. So those motivator hormones are what we call stress, or anxiety, and we are supposed to experience them, and the body is expects to experience them. It's not a bad thing. Stress in that way is a really, really good thing. It's exactly what the body's designed to do, as are the gratifying hormones. But they're only supposed to be short, and they're there to help us remember how to behave as well. So if we do something that helps us survive, then those gratifying hormones help the brain to log it as a stored memory to know what to do next time. We, as modern humans, are kind of going like this, away from the survival road. Like we very rarely come back onto it. And one of the things that the brain wants us to do is remain in connection with our tribe, because it's safety. It's all based on safety. So, the survival road, the one that we're going up, snaking across, it's just safety. It's just to survive, to stop us dying. And as soon as we move away from connection with other people, we're putting ourselves into danger. So the brain wants us to get back onto that road. So it alerts us with the motivating hormones, which are the ones that we don't like today. They're the ones that we think don't feel good. And when we don't have connection, physical connection, I mean, by physical, I don't mean necessarily sexual or overly physical, but just face to face as opposed to on a screen. When we don't have physical connection with people and form strong bonds with a group of people, then the brain is going to keep trying to nudge us back to do that, which means it's going to keep releasing these motivating hormones, the adrenaline, the cortisol, the ones that cause us to feel the feelings that we describe as anxiety or stress. So it's really important for our mental health and physical health, because a permanent feed of motivator hormones is damaging to our body. Short bursts, really exactly how the body's supposed to behave. Permanent, really damaging. And so that's why we need to have connection. Now, one part of how we used to live and the connection we needed was also close, deep connections. And that's why a lot of these ancient tribes have rituals, because those rituals in maybe rituals is the wrong word, but regular celebrations, regular kind of comings together, and ceremonies and things like that, was so that the tribe members would demonstrate their commitment to the tribe, and their trust. That makes them trustworthy people, and it makes everyone trust each other. And it's really important as well in these groups that everyone knows everything about each other, because you've got to be able to rely on each other and work together. And there's actually a magic number. So the researcher called Dunbar, he did some research, and he found out that the kind of perfect number of people really in one group is 150. When there's 150 people, everybody can know each other well. Beyond 150, you can't really do that. He doesn't say in his research, but logically to me, everyone's 150 must be the same 150. Like my 150 must be the same as your 150, because otherwise that doesn't work. And so for people who are feeling disconnected, the important thing is to try and find a community, a group of people where it's generally the same group of people who you can get to know well, and you can trust each other, and you have physical face-to-face contact with each other. And that can be anything. People do different things. Some people just go to the same yoga group a couple of times a week. Some people have a tight social group. Other people volunteer somewhere. There's so many different things. Even I don't know why I'm thinking of it, but like a neighborhood watch group. I imagine that they're a group of people who come together. It's very, very difficult in our world. You can't. It's just impossible to have 150 people and every person in that 150 is the same 150. Like I think without creating an environment that could appear quite cult-like, where no one is allowed to talk to anyone outside of it, it would be near on impossible. But trying to achieve that in as close a way as possible would be a good way to start to feel a sense of connection and belonging.
Yeah, it's really insightful. Thank you so much. And it's very interesting, because I was thinking about the fear element and how I know you alluded to this, but how obviously when there's fear before of an animal chasing you and then you run, and that's the motivator to run. And yet when you were speaking about later on, the fear was that the crops weren't going to grow. And that's the sort of fear level we have now, where there's no way physically of getting rid of those hormones.
Exactly.
like an animal that runs in the wild away from another animal that wants to eat it, and then it shakes.
Yep.
And so we don't have that now. So we're storing all of that fear rather than shaking it out.
Yeah, and it's less that we don't have the ability to get rid of the fear. It's more that the pressures don't go away.
Mm.
So like you just said, the fear of a crop's growing, that's a permanent fear. That fear would be there forever. And now obviously it's a more modern thing, like financial pressure, having to pay the mortgage each month, or having to do a presentation at work. That might be a shorter term stress, but you still might have a month of stress because you've got a presentation to do and you don't like speaking in public.
Absolutely. And that's why we have insurances as well, because of those fears. They, what's the word? They're there to stop us having these fears about certain things, and people will pay for them. Some people have a lot of insurances, some people don't.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I appreciate that. Is there anything else you want to share with us before we wrap up today?
No, I've enjoyed sharing those things I've shared.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your time. And we'll put some
Thank you.
of the people that you've mentioned and also a bit about your book in the bio. It's not out yet, is it?
No,
So,
it's still mid, very much in draft. So it's one to
well,
come back to.
by the time people watch this, and get round to this podcast, maybe it will be ready. So as soon as it is, what we'll do is we'll add the link into the bio as well.
Yeah.
So, and we look forward to reading that. Thank you so much, Juliet, for your time
Thank
today.
you.